Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's Anne, and it's Oscar weekend at the time I'm making this slash hopefully uploading this. Yeah, so I thought it'd be fun to hop on here and just talk about the movies that are up for Best Picture. Those 9 movies that are up for Best Picture this year are Jojo Rabbit, Little Women, Marriage Story, Ford vs. Ferrari, The Irishman, Joker, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Parasite. That was 9, right? So I want to take the time to talk about what I mean when I say that a movie is a real contender versus the movies that are not real contenders. What I look at when making those judgments are the other categories that these movies got nominated in at the Oscars. So in general, your Best Picture winner probably has a Best Director nomination, probably is nominated in its writing category, and then it's usually nominated in Best Editing as well. Editing is one that I feel like gets overlooked a lot, but since 1934, when the Academy first started giving out the editing Oscar, only 9 Best Picture winners have not been nominated in editing, and of those 9, only 1 has done it within the last 40 years. So I look at those 3 categories, and then I also look to things like the SAG Awards or the Producers Guild Awards, because the people in the Academy that picked the Oscars are also usually members of guilds like that. So there's a fair amount of overlap between like who picks the SAG Awards or the Producers Guild Awards and who picks the Oscars. The 3 movies we have this year that are up in either one of the 2 screenplay categories and in the director category and in editing are going to be Joker, The Irishman, and Parasite. And then the other one that I do not want to count out though is 1917. This won at the Producers Guild Awards, and one thing I do want to point out is that the movie that won Best Picture within the last 40 years without getting the editing nod was Birdman, which like 1917 did this whole like single take for the whole movie kind of shtick. So I would say right now 1917 and Parasite are kind of our 2 frontrunners. Parasite won at SAG, and then I would not be surprised to see it go to Joker or The Irishman, but I would be highly surprised to really see it go to any of the other ones, but I think it's going to go definitely to one of those 4. All in all, I like these nominees. I think the Academy did a decent job with them. Usually there's at least one, like, Dear God No movie that gets nominated every year where I'm like, how, they better not. I just, can they please not? But this year, every movie is good enough that I would not absolutely hate to see it win. And I'm also excited to see that we have some movies that are kind of outside the norm a little bit. We have a comic book movie, we have a like irreverent comedy about Nazis, we have a foreign language like psycho thriller slash maybe horror, depending on how you define horror movies, and then of course some of your business as usual type movies with like 1917 or The Irishman or things like that. Kind of the movies you sort of expect the Academy to nominate. So usually there's the movie I'm rooting for, there's a few that I wouldn't mind seeing win, and then there's some of those Dear God Knows. But this year it's kind of complicated, but hopefully you can stick with me as I walk you through my thoughts on these movies. So in this first category of sure, I guess, we got Ford vs. Ferrari and Marriage Story. These are good movies. They effectively tell the story they are trying to tell, and I don't regret spending 2 hours of my life with either one. That being said, I don't feel like they're really pushing any boundaries or challenging the status quo in any way. I don't feel like they're movies I'm still going to be like thinking about or talking about 5 years from now. They're just kind of movies that are good. And we're actually lucky enough to have a year where we do have quite a few contenders who are really challenging our notions of what we thought those kinds of movies had to be. And we'll get more into that as the video progresses, but I don't think it's worth that much time to talk about Ford versus Ferrari and Marriage Story. They're just good movies, that's it. Moving on to this next category, we've got Jojo Rabbit and Little Women. These I thought were charming and delightful. You definitely need to have like a particular sense of humor to really get into Jojo Rabbit. But if we're talking strictly about like just what movie I liked the most, what movie I am going to recommend to the most people, what movie I am going to like watch over and over again for years to come, it's probably Jojo Rabbit. Jojo Rabbit wins Best Picture of these 9. I know it's probably not going to win at the Academy, and that's totally fine. But I did thoroughly enjoy Jojo Rabbit. I love me a good comedy that kind of also has a point to it and something a little bit deeper. And I thought this movie did a good job with that. On Little Women, I thought Saoirse Ronan particularly was great, but really the whole cast is great. They gel so well as sisters. Timothée Chalamet is really good in it too. And it's kind of interesting the way it's cut together. It's told in like a non-linear way, so it is kind of, I think, making us rethink our notions of like what book to movie adaptations have to be, which is kind of cool. And I know I could relate to it. It makes me excited to see what Greta Gerwig's doing in the future, as does Jojo Rabbit makes me excited to see what Taika Waititi is going to do in the future. So both of these movies get huge stamps of approval from me, but also they're probably not going to win. Okay, now we're on to the weirdest category of movie, which is the movie that I don't think is going to win, the movie that I did not particularly like that much, but also I would kind of still be happy if it pleasantly surprised me and won, and that is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And please don't get me wrong, when I say I did not like this movie, I am not saying it is a bad movie. That's not what I'm getting at. I just mean that it doesn't have that sort of like rewatchable quality that like Jojo Rabbit will for me personally. It doesn't spark joy the same way. But I thought it did some really interesting things. And what I love about this movie is that it kind of spits in the face of what Joker was trying to do. So many movies and TV shows of recent memory are trying to do the like, let's take this senseless act of violence and let's get inside that violent person's head. Let's figure out why they did it. What were the events leading up to it? Blah, 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 blah. We have like a whole, true crime documentary section of Netflix that does this. We see it on the TV side of things with like the sort of like white boy anti-hero nonsense that's been happening since The Sopranos. And like those stories can be good, and we'll talk about that when we get to Joker. But what I love about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is that it just kind of says, no, we're going to focus on the victims, and we're going to humanize the victims and talk about how their lives were going and how they were feeling about things. And then we're just going to let this senseless act of violence be a senseless act of violence. We're not even going to try to pretend that, what these murderers and what Charlie Manson were thinking, made sense to anybody. And I thought that was just like a really interesting, bold choice. And it's one of those movies where it's like you have to see it to kind of have that thought of, oh, maybe the way we usually tell these stories is actually really screwed up. And it has that ability to sort of challenge our expectations and our notions of like what a sort of true crime story has to be. And I really enjoy it for that. And I think Tarantino's made a lot of other great movies. I've definitely seen some people argue on behalf of this movie just on the grounds of like, oh, like it might be one of Tarantino's last movies and Tarantino deserves to win a Best Picture or Best Director at some point. And that'd be fine too. So don't really think this is going to win. Don't really think it's going to be a movie I rewatch for years to come. But also if it wins, I'd kind of be happy about it. So I have very conflicted feelings about Joker. Joker is great in a lot of ways. I love that it sort of proves that you can take a more dark, raw, gritty approach towards the comic book film and have it work. I wish this is what they had done with Venom a year or two ago whenever they made Venom. I like seeing the comic book film go a little bit darker versus the sort of like Marvel-fied, family-friendly version that we've been seeing this last decade. And I think the movie does a very good job of making you sympathize with the Joker without necessarily liking the Joker. Joaquin Phoenix is very good in it. Like, I get why it's sort of the phenomenon that it is. And I also don't know that it's really fair to hold a single movie responsible for what's really a much, much larger trend. But I feel like this sort of narrative of, oh, let's get inside the bad guy's head and see how he got to be the way he is. I feel like that's disproportionately an arc given to white males, or at least recognized when it's about white males. A couple years ago, there was this really, really good movie with Daveed Diggs called Blindspotting, and it was about a black man on his last few days of probation and kind of all the different events that sort of put him on the path that he was on, and how he was desperately trying to cling to a new path where he wouldn't have to be on probation anymore. And I feel like that tries to look at more like inner city kind of gang violence and try to, deconstruct it and say, hey, why do people get on this path? And it didn't get shit from the Oscars. Like it's a very good movie, but I feel like for that reason I would kind of not love seeing the Joker or just seeing Joker win, even though it's still a good movie that effectively does what it's trying to do, I think. I'm just a little bit over this narrative of let's get inside the bad guy's head. And that's why, again, I think if like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood triumphed over it, it would be amazing. Okay, so we have two movies in this category, The Irishman and 1917, both of whom I would say are legitimate contenders for Best Picture. What's frustrating here is I feel like a lot of the dialogue surrounding both of these movies is about one particular aspect of its production and or distribution. So with The Irishman, it's the fact that it's a Netflix movie, and there's still this kind of larger debate happening about whether or not Netflix movies should really be Oscar eligible or not. We got it last year with Roma, and this year Netflix pulled out the big guns. They got Scorsese, of all people, and we will never know what this film's chances would have been had it not been a Netflix film. And then in the case of 1917, it's the fact that it was all shot in, one take, or I mean, it wasn't literally shot in one take, but that's what they make it look like. And I just think it's a shame because both of these films are really good for a lot of different reasons, and I wish that we were talking about them in their entirety. I think The Irishman is a real testament to what effective exposition can do. I mean, it's a Jimmy Hoffa story, or it's the Jimmy Hoffa story where Jimmy Hoffa doesn't even get introduced till I think almost an hour into it. And I think that's fascinating, and especially since most of the time, only someone like Scorsese is even allowed to make a movie that long. It's refreshing to see someone remind us what like a true epic can be when it's done as well as The Irishman is done. And then in the case of 1917, I really love how this has, the Roger Deakins cinematography. It has the beautiful like spectacle and sometimes very horrifying spectacle because it's a war movie. But I also does a great job of just taking the time to remind you of like the humanity of everything and just why war is so terrible. I think Dunkirk a couple years ago, a year, I don't know, all they blend together after a while, but Dunkirk I thought was this huge ambitious technical project and it looked great. But then I had trouble really getting emotionally invested in it the same way that I got invested in 1917. And I love 1917 for kind of demonstrating that like you can have the big spectacle and you can have the effective emotional grounded storytelling, and it can work, because I think all too often one of those things is sort of sacrificed in favor of the other one. So if either one of those two wins, I would be happy. But as you probably figured out from process of elimination, that's right, y'all, I am on Team Parasite this year. This movie was just really, really good. It's well written, it's well acted, it's well shot, it's just well, all the things. And I think it not only would it be cool to see a foreign language film win Best Picture for the first time in Oscar history, but I also think that this film just does such a good job of using this sort of psycho thriller genre to explore deeper concepts. It's kind of following in the same footsteps as Get Out in that regard, where it's this parable for how poor people in a society learn to view each other as the enemy and learn to view the rich as sort of this benevolent giver that allows them to survive. And it's just so good, so tense, so everything it's trying to be and more. And it has a real shot, I think. So go Team Parasite. So thank you all for watching. Let me know your thoughts and predictions and preferences for the Oscars, or if the Oscars have already happened by the time you see this, let me know your reactions. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more content, and have a great day.